Thanks for joining me, everyone. Charles Moscowitz here. My guest is Ken LaCorte. Ken is a former executive at Fox News. About 2 decades you were there, Ken. Mm-hmm. And you also were an editor of the Fox News website. You're now launching your own network, that being KenLaCorte.com, and also your YouTube channel. Thanks for joining me, Ken.
Good to be here. How are you, Charles?
Good, Ken. So we were talking a little bit off the air about our respective backgrounds, and we brought it to the point of looking at where conservative media is today. I consider myself to be a conservative host, formerly a radio host. And, I want to maybe pick up on that, but also bring it to a particular situation that I contacted you about earlier, and that is the business of censorship of conservative opinion, specifically this phenomena of a censorship of the name of the so-called whistleblower from the media, that being related to the Trump impeachment. And what the heck is going on with that? I mean, it seems like almost a complete blackout. It's like almost Soviet style, that even to the point where yesterday it came out that Senator Rand Paul's comments on the floor of the U.S. Senate, where he mentioned not the name of a particular person that we shall not name, and not in relation to this person being the so-called whistleblower, but just in a context of how this whole business of the Ukraine agenda happened, and that has been edited off of YouTube and Facebook because of this person's name. You're someone who has a long background in media, so you have an inside view of this. What's going on here, Ken?
So let me take a step back and let's put it in a little bit of recent historical context. 10 years ago, people who thought that the media was biased to the left, which most national news media is, they saw the internet as kind of the savior and salvation of free thought and of open discourse of ideas. And what we've seen over the last, I would say it's probably 3 to 4, maybe a few more years on that, is primarily the left has used cancel culture, has used a various number of tactics to basically silence their opponents. Now, when we grew up in the 80s, it was really on the other side. It was churches not wanting the library to have naughty books or things like that, or in certain school districts they would say no, you can't teach evolution. I mean when conservatives or the whole Red Scare, which was mm-hmm. half 2/3 true, but 1/3 overblown if you said certain things. So there was a clampdown of speech on the other side. What we've seen now, though, is it's definitely now one of the primary weapons of the left. They own most of the on-air type of outlets, and to be honest, most of the big platforms that we consider kind of free speech zone, they're almost down to an entity, are based within 5 miles from where I'm sitting, maybe 10 miles. I'm right near the bridge in right outside of San Francisco, and you've got 25-year-old woke kids who are deciding what can and can't be said and what will be elevated and reduced on Twitter, Facebook, the whole 9 yards. So they come up with very ambiguous terms and conditions that can mean anything. And we've seen this. BuzzFeed will go see, that guy said a gay slur on his show. They will then, BuzzFeed's done this a lot. Vox has done this a lot. Then they go up to the outlet, go up to the Facebook or the Twitter and say, hey, this person's violating the law. And then you see a lot of what I consider very selective takedowns. I mean, it's at the point where a Facebook executive said, you can say bad things about Alex Jones on Facebook, but we'll zap you if you say anything good about him. It's not even him posting, it's you talking about it. So flash forward now to this instance, which is the whistleblower, so-called whistleblower in impeachment. So there are two national narratives. One narrative is you had this guy who heard Trump being Trump, and he does his thing, and he was being illegal, and this person is a true whistleblower and said, I can't stand this, and he released this information, and he deserves the anonymity and protection that a whistleblower is given. That's kind of the side of the left, and almost all of the news media, and certainly almost all of the social media, I think, except for Twitter in this instance. On the right, there's a very different narrative. Their narrative is the CIA and NSA and FBI had been paying way too much attention to the Trump campaign since even before he was elected. The FBI starts an investigation based on very flimsy, one dude in a bar on the other side of the world who'd never even met Donald Trump said something, and they were listening to Flynn's phone calls. They were putting people inside. They had electronic surveillance on this campaign. And now there was a guy who worked in the White House, but for the CIA, who had been accused earlier of leaking out some conversations with the president. Not illegal conversations, but things that he thought would embarrass him. They shipped, and he was also reported to have been talking with another guy early on in the first weeks of the Trump administration, saying, we need to get rid of this guy. We need to make him go. And that guy he was talking to, coincidentally now, works on Adam Schiff's staff.
Right.
This CIA analyst was kicked out of the White House and sent to Langley, and in his off hours wrote up this whistleblower complaint that then became the basis of an impeachment of a president. And so that's the other side. So literally now you have almost all media refusing to say his name or give any background information on him. I did on Facebook. They pulled me first temporarily and then officially completely off. I think they thought some other bad things were going on, which just was not true. I was pulled off of Facebook. I was pulled off of Instagram. I had videos that were taken off of YouTube. And finally, Google sent us notes saying, we're demonetizing certain parts of certain pages. You can't run our ads on those pages that mentions this person's name. And flash forward to now this week, when you literally have, you can go see Hitler speeches of him talking in Munich, but you can't watch a U.S. senator talking on the floor of the U.S. Senate last night because of YouTube's terms and conditions. So it's a different world. I think that this is a small sliver of what's happening in a much larger sense. And that larger sense really, really bothers me, because they're getting a lot of low-hanging, smaller conservative outlets and killing them completely. And they'll always find some little thing where they went over a line. Last week, Zero Hedge had close to 750,000 Twitter followers. And they were writing about the coronavirus, and they published some information but it was information that they found online of a researcher in China that they said, hey, maybe this person should be asked of what's going on. That was enough to get them killed. I had 3.5 million followers on Facebook.
Incredible.
I can't even get an email back from Facebook saying what we did wrong, or is there any way to fix it? That's what kind of power they have.
No, they do, and I mean, I've already been told, even though I've only been at this for maybe less than a year, and I don't have any money, but that I've been shadow banned for various reasons, and I've had strikes put against me. Ironically, because with the claim that I engaged in hate speech, assumedly because I had said something anti-Semitic, putting aside the fact that I'm a devout Jew who is pro-Israel. Never mind that.
If Ben Shapiro can be a Nazi, you can be an anti-Semite.
I guess so. Right. And but somebody out there doesn't like something I'm saying, and they just wanted to have me zapped. I mean, it probably might have been someone who's Jewish. I don't know, because I'm very conservative, and that might PO some very ultra-liberal Jews.
There are organized people who will sit and tattle on you.
Right. Yeah, I mean, that's what it's come down to. It's sort of like turning people in for not being politically correct. Here you are, someone that I think a red flag. And I want to zero in a little bit on the business of this particular so-called whistleblower, because I think that maybe I'm putting on a tin hat here. I don't know. But even based upon what you just described with regard to who this person is and what they had access to, It seems to me that this is a real circling of the wagons around keeping this person out of any discussion. Because if this person is exposed, and if we do find out publicly who he is and or she and what they're about, then that's going to blow the whole lid on this rotten, impeachment agenda, and even more deeply on the whole business of what President Trump, I think, accurately describes as the deep state.
I mean, certainly the left will make the argument that it doesn't matter what, and there is an argument to be made there. It doesn't matter who the whistleblower is or what he did. This should be based on what Trump did or didn't do. Just like if there was a bad cop and arrested you for something, we shouldn't be talking about him. We should be talking about your behavior. On the other hand, it's really fair to say if the cops were following Charles around 24/7 and they eventually got him on a pretty minor offense that they then hauled him into the courts for, that would be part of your defense is, wait a second, this was a setup from the get-go. And look, I think the Republicans have a very strong case to be made on that. This president, this is the first time we have had we have a highly weaponized, highly accurate intelligence gathering capabilities that has grown up ever since these phones came out, and they figured out how to now track me 24/7, how to have an audio that they can turn on or off at the whims of a FISA court. And everything that you type into your computer now can be seen by analysts. That is a surveillance state that we've never seen in the history of the world. And you combine that with a surveillance organization with a lot of holdovers who don't like the new president. Man, if this becomes the new normal, we live in very weird times. I mean, look at us right now. We're two adults.
Right.
We can't say the name of a guy that everybody in Washington, D.C. knows. And we're afraid to say that because the powers that be might zap this up.
Out there. I mean, most of our listeners to this program know his name. I mean, it's out there, and yet, I think that Sebastian Gorka was taken off the air as well for mentioning it.
I mean, it's just that's the kind of crap that happened in the Soviet Union in 1979.
And this, to me, is something that we should look at as emblematic of, as you say, a much bigger, broader problem: the weaponizing of our so-called intelligence, or what Professor Michael Glennon of the Fletcher School of Law and Diplomacy is called the double government. He wrote a fantastic book. I interviewed him about a year ago. You should get him on. He doesn't. He's very liberal, and he was a Senate. He's a chief counsel to the Obama administration. He doesn't agree with my take on his book, but his book lays out the rise of the intelligence state, starting with the National Security Act of 1948, signed by Truman. And there were people back then warning the country about it, and the rise of the CIA, the NSA, all of these agencies and their intercoordination, the fact that they're operating a lot off the books with unapproved monies from Congress, and that they have millions of people and businesses and affiliates all over the world. That here they are, what I think Trump calls the deep state, and they're protecting themselves by it's pretty. And to my way of thinking, the business of the so-called whistleblower is a very open example of that. One that should be amplified for that reason, because if this is the tip, this is the head of the snake. If this is exposed, it's going to show the whole rotten mess.
Yeah, the only thing that I'm unclear on is this, how organized is it from up top? Is it various groups within these entities? I mean, look, I'm a believer that there are a lot of bad people who are trying to do bad things to the United States, and we need a healthy intelligence. But this is going to be one of those, right now the Democrats are happy because it's holdovers inside of these agencies going after Trump. But at some point, somebody's going to release Bernie Sanders's emails or his audio conversations where he says something bad, and we're not going to know. Did that come from the Russians? Did that come from? Did somebody hand that over to Julian Assange, or was it the FBI working for Trump now? And this is going to be one of those issues where you see the two halves of America changing their hats. They loved. they loved drones Republicans loved drones under Obama, under Bush, under Obama. They were like, well, he's sure killing a lot of guys. Now they love him again. It's going to be one of those that will be a bipartisan issue.
And they didn't talk about Obama's immigration policies. It's only when Trump is president. So, yeah, I mean, it shows in a way one of the instructive elements of this is the situational stand of the left. It's all about power. I mean, we all recall that back in the 70s and 80s, how they railed against the FBI and COINTELPRO and the CIA. I mean, I had a guest back then from the left who would come on my show and he had intricate details about the FBI. He won't come on with me now.
Right. Interesting.
Because now the FBI, it's the left's FBI.
Right.
Now you have James Comey, and
I'm sure you have factions of both inside. I mean, look, you can't go to too many dinner parties and mention the word Donald Trump without seeing the room split in two and people hate him or love him. And to think that the same emotions aren't involved in the CIA, and FBI, all he had to do was read the Strzok text to his girlfriend. It's like, they felt exactly the same way that these people screaming out on the sidewalks are. They just happen to have the access to an unlimited amount of spying and ability at the stroke of a pen, and that's where we have to be very, very careful.
But but even recently, the business of having an amphibious landing and helicopters and 20 guys in ninja suits show up to arrest Roger Stone. I mean,
Don't forget CNN was parked across the street, though. Somehow they
they were there early. They were and the guy that was at CNN was formerly an FBI guy, so they knew it was coming down. And then to have him sentenced to possibly 9 years in prison, and they're upset that somebody might criticize that. I mean, this is a left that, to my way of thinking, but putting aside the business of the whistleblower, which exposes the deep state, these kind of machinations, I would hope, expose the philosophy, the beliefs of the left, and it is that they don't give a damn about things like civil liberties. As long as it's used, if it's in their hands, they're for the oppression of it.
I think you're right. I think that we are so partisan right now. I can hear what they're saying. They're saying, wait a second, Charles, you finally, you don't believe in the rule of law. Stone attempted to do jury misconduct and X, Y, and they'll go through it all and say, well, wait a second. Sure. I thought you Republicans were law and order types, but I guess you're only law and order types if it's not your guys being arrested. And they've got their
I know what you mean. That's like, I'm a law and order type in that I don't think it's right for a man who's never been convicted of anything bigger than a parking ticket, and he's 75 years old, to be put in prison for 9 years for basically sending out some tweets.
Right.
I mean, it's it's ugly. I mean, and the fact that this would be tolerated by people because they're so besotted by their ideology, that is just beyond my comprehension. Actually, I've never seen anything like it.
So in the last year of Fox, the U.S. attorney in New York, Preet Bharara, he was let go by Obama. No, I'm sorry. He was let go by Trump.
Yeah.
He read some articles about Fox News and basically decided to have a fishing expedition and opened up a grand jury inquiry into Fox News. This is something that has barely been reported anywhere because everybody who was involved in it is afraid to upset the people who have subpoena power. And after I left Fox, this is after the election. I was pulled back to go sit before a panel of these U.S. attorneys who were looking for anything that they could find on it. And what they were trying to find, I think, was they were going to try to prove that Roger Ailes was hiring private investigators and doing things to help himself, not to help Fox, and therefore that was a securities violation, and they were going to get him. Or anything. They literally, once they're in there,
Right.
they have carte blanche. Two things happened that screwed him up. One is Roger Ailes died, but they still had this open. The other thing is Hillary Clinton didn't win. Hillary Clinton lost, and that was a shock to everyone. But so they pulled me into this. Now this happened 2 years ago. This would have been, let's say, mid 2017. I would say. And at first I thought, I don't need a lawyer. I didn't do anything unethical when I was at Fox, let alone illegal. And then my lawyer friend sat on me and made me hire a law firm to go through every single email and whatnot. And so here I am with these guys, and they're basically on a fishing expedition. There was no, and so far, to flash forward, they have never come up with any indictment or anything. They've also not called off the investigation. So there are people. So when you're called to this and your friends are called in, you can't talk to those guys because you know that if you have an email exchange or a phone number, then the next time you're called up, they'll say, were you colluding with this person to talk about your testimony? So they're literally people that I haven't spoken with in 2 years, friends, because they are fearful that, well, if the government redoes this. And, I'm not a big conspiracy guy. I don't see George Soros under everything. But a lot of what they focused on was my efforts when I was at Fox to combat Media Matters. Media Matters is a left-wing organization that basically was funded with some Soros money and a lot of other money to come after Fox. And before I go to New York and sit down in this meeting, I Googled the name of the top prosecutor on this case. And I look at it, and the number 2 Google search was that this guy was a Soros Foundation scholar, that a Soros Foundation actually paid for his law degree. I think it was at a good big school, so like Yale. I think it was Yale or Harvard.
Right. And
when I'm sitting in this, and I literally have people who can throw me in jail asking me questions under oath. It's a nerve-wracking thing. There was no crime there. They're fishing for things. Literally, one was sent to college by a left-wing source, and they were digging into this stuff and trying to find dirt on Fox. And that's what we're seeing more and more is the criminalization of policy. I mean, I told them at one point, I said exactly what I said. I was like, I didn't do anything unethical, let alone illegal. And I've got a feeling that if I reported and our news broadcast was more like MSNBC and CNN, I wouldn't be sitting here under oath and having $1,000 an hour attorneys worried about my future. But they targeted us because they didn't like Fox, they didn't like what we're reporting, and that's a scary game. But that's why when I hear the locker up or all that, I'm like, we start criminalizing politics, and that's not a good road to go down.
No, it's not. And boy, I mean, it's. I think that the obvious present example of this is the Mueller group and Trump and the Mueller. They were like a bunch of brown shirts. I mean, they're putting people in prison that had nothing to do with Trump, and even Trump's lawyer. It just was ugly, and it's just something that I think should be instructive to anyone.
That's what you do exactly when you don't have an underlying crime that you found. You go the Martha Stewart approach. And as your listeners may remember, Martha Stewart ironically didn't do anything illegal, but then lied to the FBI and they tripped her up. Same thing with Flynn. Same thing with Stone. These people, out of that whole Mueller investigation and all of that stuff, not one American was accused or indicted for colluding with a foreign power in the U.S. election. They got a couple guys for either lying in the investigation. They caught some guy for old tax stuff and whatnot, but that was
irrelevant to anything. I mean, they committed the terrible crime of supporting Trump, and doing so publicly. And you mentioned Martha Stewart. I mean, Comey was all over that one. That was his big claim to fame. And
look, and they still that's a pelt on their they're the guy who sent Martha Stewart to jail for lying to him. That's on his resume.
Right. So you have, then if you criticize them, they'll say, oh, you're criticizing the FBI. Not at all. We're criticizing an element, a rogue element in the FBI that has obviously exceeded its mandate as dictated by Congress when it set it up. And it's not that it's new either. I mean, FBI, J. Edgar Hoover was not exactly easygoing.
No, he was as bad, or people forget that the FBI was actively encouraging Martin Luther King to kill himself as they leaked out sex tapes.
Right, and then they were putting bugs under his bed.
Right.
And by the way, that was at the authorization of Robert Kennedy as Attorney General.
Wow, I did not know that.
This was reported in Lawrence Lima's book, The Kennedy Men.
Wow.
That, apparently JFK took Martin Luther King aside the one time he came to the White House, and he said, look, you have these two people around you who are communists, and I want you to fire them. They're not good. I mean, they're a danger. And Martin Luther King said he would, but he didn't do it. And so Robert Kennedy blew his top, and he went to Hoover and said, we have to, watch him. We have to surveil him.
Like Hoover would ever give him the full transcript. But
well, anyway, but we're getting into history
sure,
here.
Sure.
But I want to bring things up to today as well. I'm trying to do my little part here with this YouTube channel. You're operating on a fairly big platform, doing the same. We thought we were getting involved in a form of media that was supposed to be a free and open expression of ideas and opinions. I mean, I saw the writing on the wall back in 1998 when Hillary Clinton, as First Lady, made a comment about the need to regulate the internet because it was under the guise that they had to remove pornography, which of course has not been touched. It's everywhere.
Right.
But, I could already see it, and a lot of conservatives could as well. This is what's going to happen. They're going to find some excuse, the camel under the tent to basically regulate the internet. And that's exactly what's happened. And they applaud it, and they have media, that they have promotion that we're stopping. They're not stopping the real bad people either. I mean, you still have, the nastiest of anti-American, anti-everything views. They're stopping people that they don't personally like.
Yeah, look, this is all organized. It is I mean, it is done for political power, not for anything good. I mean, the one thing that the First Amendment kind of recognized is the best antidote to bad speech is more speech. And but look, I'm a huge believer that political campaigns and discussions are downstream from media, from and whether that's social media, whether that's mass media, that they're downstream from schools and colleges. I mean, when you have, there's a study that a survey that came out fairly recently showing it was about half, I forget, it was just over half or just under half of college students saying the First Amendment shouldn't apply to hate speech. And you want to go and grab somebody by the neck and throttle them and saying, what do you mean hate speech? What is that? Are you so now you're itty-bittying saying, I mean, we have very, very narrow definitions of over-the-top speech in America, down to basically, you can't encourage somebody to go do credible violence right then. But kids now are coming out of colleges thinking if you say that fat girl is fat and say it with a tone in your voice, that's making her feel bad and therefore that's hate speech. Or say you don't believe a transgender person is actually a different sex or gender, or I get a little confused on it. Those kids are now running, and I mean, it's like those kids who were saying those things and those beliefs in college, they're now senior vice presidents at Google and at YouTube and they're running that. And conservatives find themselves caught up in a little bit of well, I'm conservative, so I really don't want the government to go in and tell some private company what they can do in their company. I'm conservative enough to say the government should stay out of that, even self-made monopolies. A lot of conservatives say that hey, it's Mark Zuckerberg built that, the government shouldn't come in and break that up. I've got some askew thoughts on that, because I actually think that these companies are being served by a lot of federal law that should be changed on that, not broken up. But that puts conservatives in a weird thing. So everybody kind of hates Facebook right now and those, but it's the Democrats want them to clamp down more on speech. Republicans want them to clamp down less on what they consider bad speech. And nobody's really doing all that much on it.
No, I mean, first of all, the idea of criminalizing hate speech, however it's defined, is un-American. It is a communist idea. Because if you criminalize hate speech, you're going to criminalize political speech, and you're going to criminalize opinion. Hate speech, for example, is something that is a legitimate issue if there is a real crime committed, which is criminal. And you could look to it as part of testimony in the process of discovering and convicting a person of a crime. Yeah, if they engage in hate speech, sure, that's goes to motivation in a crime. But the speech itself is not criminal under American understanding, traditional understanding of law. Speech itself is free. I think that it was Supreme Court Justice Oliver Wendell Holmes who kind of set the guidelines when he said, free speech does not mean you can yell fire in a crowded theater. In other words, you can't advocate violence or do things that directly cause violence to people. But beyond that, we are supposed to have free speech, and it's not supposed to be criminalized. And as far as the private ownership of Facebook, that is something I've heard conservatives say. And I think that at this point, Facebook and these other groups, which tend to all be of like mind, they control such a large percentage of the means of communication in this country that, while they're still technically private, you can't, it'd be like deciding to regulate what people say on the telephone.
Right.
It's beyond, this is our means today in this society of communication.
Well, ironically, they are protected by, what is it, Section 230 of the Communications Decency Act. Mm-hmm. And you brought up telephone. So law was put into place, which basically said if you are a pipeline of information, you're not a publisher, you're just allowing that to go from one place to another. You can't be held liable for that information. So if you call me on a Sprint cell phone and I either libel somebody or we decide to go commit murder and do things, nobody's going to go sue Sprint. Well, those regulations are what protects Facebook and Twitter and all those, because they are considered not liable for things you say on Twitter or any of those platforms. But then they don't act like pipelines. Then they start, and they've started over the last number of years, acting more like publishers, saying, well, we're now flagging this news story as true, or this one is false, or this one we're dropping from your thing, or we're searching for hate words that we call and eliminating that, or silencing it, or taking down I almost said his name, the whistleblowers thing. So I would argue, and I hope that they get to it, that politicians start looking at this in a more serious manner, saying you can't have it both ways. You can't say we are a non-biased platform and therefore we're under protection of the Communications and Decency Act, and don't you ever sue us for somebody calling somebody a criminal online, while at the same time acting like a publisher and putting their editorial thinking in it and out of it, just like I would have at a Fox News or at LaCorte News today. If I publish something that's libelous, even though the libel laws are kind of a joke in America, that I'm liable for the ramifications of that. So I think that's a huge thing that the government needs to look into and say, you can have it one way or another. You can't pretend to be a platform and act like a publisher. I don't think you need to break up Facebook. I think you need to apply those laws accurately.
Right. I think that is the lever to try to get at these groups, Facebook, Twitter, all of them, that they are publishers, essentially. Right. They're not free and open exchanges for opinion. They do regulate opinion. Right. And I think if that can be proven, then either they're going to have to, share the space a little bit with other groups that also are publishers, or they're going to have to stop the regulation of opinion. And just to put one or another. And look, there are ways to. Yeah, I clearly view that as a thing. I also view that copyright laws probably need to be changed around a little bit. There was no concept of when you signed up for Facebook that on their 4,000th word in their terms and condition that you said, yeah, anything I put up here, they can claim a copyright on my pictures and on my statements, so that a Facebook competitor can't suck that information out and put it. We can't make Charles' book grab people's photos from Facebook. Ironically, it's not the people that will sue it. It'll be sued by Facebook, saying, yeah, we're not liable for any of this content, but we have the claim for it. So they're using some other laws as well to bolster their monopoly on that. Because the reason why I used to be on Facebook wasn't because they had my stuff. It's because they had all my friends' stuff, and nobody else did. So, Ken, what do you suggest, if anything, as someone who is in a position in the media that we can do? Like a small fish like me or someone else who's trying to do a little media. What can we do about this?
Charles, I've spent a lot of time thinking about it, a lot of time reporting on it. The first iteration of what I did when I left Fox is I really tried to go as centrist, and I hired my ex-boss from Fox News. I brought in a former top guy who ran NPR's news product. And we really tried to form that middle ground, because the media's kind of gotten all. I still got killed by Facebook, and I still got wiped out as a dangerous conservative and disappeared. I think we're in a transitional period with the mainstream media going from kind of reliably liberal for the most part, except for talk radio and one station on one station on all of the dial, to now a media that we saw probably 100 years ago, where they're not pretending and even giving a pretense of being intellectually honest, but they're pulling full for their side. The New York Times is a perfect example of that. Probably the most impressive news organization in my entire lifetime. But I now look at piece after piece that is radically intellectually dishonest, and by the omission of facts, and so they're riding on the coattails of people actually saying, I believe what's in the New York Times. I mean, I believe the facts. I don't believe that where they lead you, because they lead you to lies by telling the truth. So I'm going to get much more in people's face. I think that the days of it gets tough to report time after time. This conservative just got zapped from this platform. This major news organization. I think we need to continue to expose the fallacy that NBC or CNN or these people are being fair arbiters of information. So continuing to expose their hypocrisy on that. I also think it's important to build up alternative voices, because as we transfer into that new world, 90% of those voices are on one side of the political debate, and Fox News and some people online that are harder to find now, and AM radio are on the other side. And I think that conservatives need to work together more and start to build up a whole alternative narrative on and stick together on that. I mean, I think that Fox is too big. They don't need to play any of this. They're too big for people to screw with, and they don't view the world in those kind of political things. But I think the Breitbarts and the lesser guys need to stop viewing each other as competitors and start viewing each other as allies in the broader sense. I think people need to start being able to find podcasts like yours. I think that people need to hear exactly and how they're being misled by just turning on TV or just going to the major news sites. Whatever pops up on their phone from Apple News is not the fair narrative. It's one narrative, and there are many competing realities out there with just as much facts. And then at some point in the upcoming future, we're going to need to be able to have truly some tech alternatives as well. Right now, it's a tricky thing to come up with. It's a tricky thing to try to make a free speech zone, because then when you first start that, you really get the Nazis and the bad, the really bad people who've been kicked off of those other things. I think that the right is going to need to kind of come together and start to come up with some competing platforms that their voices can be heard on. This is not a 2-year fight. This is a 10-year fight, and they need to do it.
No, I appreciate that. I mean, I'm trying to do a little of it myself, in that I download this program both into YouTube and Vimeo, so I have it in another venue, and then I download it into Podomatic, where it then automatically goes to iHeartRadio and iTunes and Spotify. Right. And all these other venues. So, and then I'm putting the whole thing up on a website, charlesmoscowitz.com, where I'm also covering links for Breitbart and for all these other people. And I'm trying to set up like RSS feeds so we can get their daily news coming off that website. So everyone can do their little part in terms of organizing more conservative opinion and setting it up so that we have many, many venues. So if they knock one out, you still have the other one.
Exactly. And look, I don't want a world where conservatives have all the levers of power either, because
of course not.
Because they'll turn into a bunch of a-holes.
They'll be no better, of course.
Yeah, but we are nowhere near that. And
it's supposed to have a balance. It's supposed to go. I mean, American history has a pendulum that goes left, right, and it doesn't go too far on either side. I mean, that's hopefully what this next election is going to be all about. But we could get into that at another time. Anyways. Ken, let my viewers and listeners know where they can get information about you and about your news service and your website.
Sure. Well, don't go to Facebook, because literally if you get a URL at Facebook and try to post it or even send it as a private message to another friend, you'll have a screen pop up that says this violates our community standards. So it's LaCorte News, LACORTE news.com. We publish a lot basically on this stuff. We look at media bias. We look at a lot of Silicon Valley censorship. We will be starting a more activist element of this at a certain point to really start saying, okay, because I think the average person, I think there's a lot of people out there who bitch about this and don't really know what can they do. What can a guy who's sitting in Omaha in front of his keyboard do to stop this crazy situation from going? And we're going to be launching something in the next month or so on that, probably at CPAC, to get that going as well.
Great, and I'll certainly keep tabs on it.
Terrific.
Ken LaCorte, I want to thank you for joining me this afternoon.
Thank you, Charles. It was a good call.
All right. Take care.
Conversation. All right. Bye-bye.
Bye.